Hello. Okay. Wow, I'm live. Fantastic. First off, I want to say thank you to everybody for coming in today to be part of this. I know that there's 10 or 12 other talks you can be at, so the fact that you are giving your time to me really, is humbling, and I appreciate it, and I want to make this totally worth your time. So thank you very much for being here. As the topic of my talk is making a web for everyone, it's depending upon where you are and what product you work on, accessibility might be an afterthought, or it might be the very first thing you deal with. As you can tell from my accent, I'm from the United States, I'm an American, and in the US, accessibility is very often driven by two factors. They are either, one, a government agency or entity has decided they want to buy your product, and they're really interested in paying you a lot of money for your product, but they have this long list of things that need to be met so that you can actually let everybody use your product. Shocking, imagine that. The other one, which is not nearly as pleasant an option, is that you're being sued. Because for some reason, your product is not usable by somebody, and then you discover that your company is facing a class action lawsuit because your product can't be used. In both cases, accessibility tends to have I don't want to say a negative connotation, but it doesn't start from the most positive of purposes. What's happening is that, we've designed a product, we've put a lot of work into it, we've put a lot of attention, we want to be able to put it out there for people to use, and now we have to do something here, and we have to make it so that it is usable by more people, and you have to shoehorn accessibility into it. And I'd like to suggest that we can do better, and that's kind of the whole point of my talk. I want to give you that as a first overlay to say, if this is not what you want to hear, I am more than happy to let you go find something else to do with your time. If, however, this does sound interesting to you and you want to hear a bit about what this is about, then I'm glad you're here. And let's go. One thing I want to make clear from the outset is that this topic and a lot of the topics that are being covered from this have been co-developed by a good friend of mine and colleague of mine named Albert Gureyev. Albert and I started on the idea early in 2015 that we wanted to do the Accessibility World Tour. And the idea was that we were going to work together and develop the ideas for this. When he was going to be able to present and I couldn't be there, he would, give me a pitch. And when I was going to present and he couldn't be there, we were going to do it. And at CAST in 2015, we had the benefit of both being in the same place and doing a workshop specifically on this topic. And so a lot of what you're going to see has been worked through by both of us. I want to give a shout out to Albert. If you want to know more about some of this and see some of his contributions, I definitely recommend you take a look at his website and follow him on Twitter, because he's a great advocate for this. So generally speaking, when we say accessibility, what does it mean to you? What does it actually imply? And the idea is that accessibility should mean that any product that is created is going to be available to as many people as possible. And that also includes people that may not be able to use the product as it is originally designed. And the bigger phrase here, and the more challenging one, is we need to be able to allow people with disabilities to have a similar experience as their normative counterparts. And that's a really hard thing to pin down. When we talk about disabilities, one of the challenges that tends to come up is that we look at them in the absolute sense. And there are a broad range of disabilities, but when you think about disabilities, what are the ones that first come to mind? Blindness, right. When we think of it, we're thinking total blindness, or we're thinking total deafness, or complete inability to move, or being a paraplegic, and having significant difficulty interacting with products. And those are realities. And it's important to understand that for many people, that is just the nature of what they have to deal with. And it is important to us to be able to make sure that if we are designing products that are good quality, that are meant to serve the broadest group of people, that we include that in everything that we're doing. I'm also going to emphasize that accessibility isn't just about dealing with the very far end cases. It's good design that helps all of us. And I'm going to get a little bit more into that a little later in the talk. I saw this when I was preparing the information for the slides, and I love this sentiment. So if there's any one takeaway that I'd like to give to everybody, this is it. And for those in the back who are troubled, it's like, the statement is, I'm worried that people are more concerned with getting their websites working on rich people's watches rather than for the blind. And I share that sentiment. Both are important, sure, but we can do so much more, and we can do so much better with the technologies that we have. And it's not that hard. If you start early on in the process with the mind that you want to design and that you want to make sure that a product is accessible up front, it's a much bigger deal when you need to do it later on. So as I mentioned earlier, why do we want to focus on accessibility? I personally think it's the right thing to do. You want to be able to encourage as many people as possible to use what you are developing. In many countries, it's the law. You know, if your product is inaccessible, you can't sell it, or you can't use it in certain marketplaces. I'm very familiar with this because when I came to the company that I'm currently working at, one of my first projects was they had done an audit with a large company, and they said, we'd love your product, we'd love to use it, but we have these key areas that we think really need to be addressed before we can commit to buying it. And every one of them was, being able to make sure that navigations worked, that you could clearly and cleanly work with a system using assistive technology. And yeah, in this case, it was a fairly big chunk of work for us to do that, but by doing that, we got that contract and we got the opportunity to have those number of seats and the money that went with it. And yes, that's good. So it is good business to be able to make your product accessible to as many people as possible. As I said, there's many different disabilities that we deal with. You have disabilities around visual issues, around auditory issues, around mobility. There are also cognitive disabilities, and many other ones that are less familiar to us. And also, many people have a combination of them. It's not just one. In some cases, you may have somebody with low vision, or you may have macular degeneration, or some other condition that also interferes. You may also have dyslexia. You may have autism. You may have any number of these coming together. And how do you work with that? And the answer is that you have to put yourself in these people's shoes. These images are from a book called A Web for Everyone, which I've got a reference to the book in the back of the notes as well. And I keep this slide up because the real key that this book provides is it introduces you to these people. And it makes them real to you. It's not just, I'm testing because somebody is blind. It actually gives you a key as to who they are, how old they are, what they're into doing, what they enjoy doing, what the issues that they are dealing with are, what technologies they use to overcome those problems. And it puts you in their shoes. You actually get to feel what it's like to be those people. Persona-based testing is very important when it comes to doing any type of accessibility. It's one thing to say, yeah, we meet the requirements. Yes, we have these options that are available, and that's great. But you get a very different sense and feel for it where you say, I'm representing Carl today, and I want to make sure that the product I'm developing is something that Carl can actually use, or that Marion can use, or that Carla can use. You want to be able to really put yourself in their shoes. And I'll discuss a bit about how to do that in a little bit. So there's a range of disabilities. There are what are called normative disabilities. When you talk about somebody being totally blind or being totally deaf or dealing with something, those are primary disabilities that we deal with. There's also secondary disability, and every one of us can find ourselves in a situation where we discover all of a sudden we have a secondary disability. If anybody has ever been at a concert and had to pick up a telephone, ringing, and you're trying desperately to communicate with somebody with 130 decibels of noise going on around you, guess what? Your device is near useless. You can't use it as designed. For me personally, if I find myself in a country where an alphabet that is not based on the Roman letters are, I'm about lost. I'm not going to be able to figure out where I am unless somebody who is local can show me. It was very interesting when I came into Berlin, and it was a late night, and I just said I need to be able to figure out how to get out to Potsdam, and I just thought they'd say, oh yes, the taxi cab's over there. Instead, the lady behind the counter went up and printed out, and she gave me a long printout and said, you can take this bus, which will take you to this train, which will take you out to this tram line, which will drop you off at a street that's about 500 yards away from your destination. Whoa, okay. It's a very good thing I did study some German when I was in high school, because otherwise I would have just looked at this and said, I have no idea what I'm looking at. But I'm actually quite impressed at how much German I did remember. I can't speak it and converse in anything resembling real time. The feedback loop in my brain is way too slow. It's like I'm trying to do speech processing with a 286. But when I'm looking at it going, okay, I know what that is. I know where these streets are. I remember what this, okay, I can make this work. And fortunately, there were enough people there that were able to help me. But yeah, I was genuinely a stranger in a strange land trying to figure out how to get around. And had I not had at least that little bit of an inkling of what I should be doing, yeah, it would have been a struggle. But fortunately, some people helped make sure that I didn't get completely lost. So we can find ourselves in a situation where we're suddenly disabled, and then what do we do? So it's not just we're designing these products for some nebulous other person. We're not just designing these products for a niche group community. When I say a web for everyone, I really mean it, because every one of us can find ourselves in a situation where we go from being completely normative to being significantly disabled. And we don't necessarily have control of when that happens. So I have some principles that I think are important. If you're going to discuss making a product that is accessible, these are the key ones that I think you need to know about, and I'll go over them at a very high level. I hate reading slides back to people, but avoid making assumptions about any of the capabilities of your users. As I said, even with secondary disabilities, it can change on a dime. So if you make something that is too narrowly, oh yes, this is going to work for everybody, it's just great, and for those who are perfectly healthy, this is going to be a wonderful product to use. Yeah, you can find yourself in a heartbeat dealing with a situation to where, yeah, it's not as usable as it looks. Your technologies are capable of sending and receiving text. That's about the only thing you can guarantee. Time and technology belongs to the user, not to us. If you have if you have content that is visual, try to provide a way to be able to describe it either in the text that surrounds it, or if you have an alt tag or a caption, something that actually is indicative of what it is. Nothing is more annoying than when you fire up a screen reader and you tab over a picture and it says image. Well, thanks. What's the image of? Is there some context here? At least with a caption, you could say, this image happens to display a penguin, being chased by a polar bear. And yes, I know that those don't really happen because polar bears are North Pole, penguins South Pole. Just work with me here. Or alt tag, this is an image of a race car about to crash into a wall. At least that way they know, oh, okay, thank you. I can at least put something together with that. Try to use technologies that are widely available and that allow the greatest ability for people to use it, especially if those technologies are free. Question here, who here has never used a screen reader before? Okay, quite a few of you. How many people here have MacBooks with them? All right, I would like you to do a little experiment for me, if you can. Go to your system settings and go to accessibility and turn on VoiceOver. Yes. For those who've actually seen me talk about this talk before, they know what's coming up, and that's why they're laughing. Turn it on, F5, toggle it on, and then just navigate to a website that you like using. And all I want you to do is press the tab key. I'll wait for a couple minutes, because the reaction should be priceless. Oh, and if you want to, you can turn up your volume on your speakers. Let everybody else enjoy in the cacophony that's about to take place. So for those in the back who can't quite hear what's happening here, you're getting a rapid-fire spit back of a voice that is describing what is on your screen. But here's what it's also doing. It's describing all of the stuff that surrounds those elements too. If you haven't made any changes to your code, if you haven't put in alt tags, if you haven't used way aria tags, you haven't structured your site. And when you hit tab to get to an element, it's going to tell you everything about that element in obnoxious, exhaustive detail. And if you are trying to navigate through a page, it is painful. You can turn it off now. Unless you're really having fun with it, then by all means. But this is a good experiment. Walk yourself into a dark room, or take a hat and pull it over your head, and turn on a screen reader and try navigating a site just for a few minutes, and realize how incredibly frustrating it is to get to the information you need and understand what's happening on the page. And realize that for a good number of people, that's their reality every single day. Use clear language to communicate your message. That's one of the benefits of having the tags, is that you can truncate this down considerably. And so you only have a little bit of detail that you have to share, and you can make it much cleaner experience for anybody who has to hear it or view it. Make your sites usable, searchable, and navigable. If you're going to really invest your time in accessibility, invest in your nav bar, because that's where they really need that help. And give them options, especially if it's to say, hey, you'd like to go down to this section. It's way low on our page, but we've created a little tag for you, so if you type in this key string, we'll take you right there. Hugely, hugely helpful. Design your content for semantic meaning and maintain separation between content and presentation. Again, example with the nav bar. Give people the ability of getting where they need to go, and don't bog them down. Let them find what they need to, get in, get out, get on with their day. Start slow and add your abilities as you move. And as you'll notice that over time, you're going to see that certain features are going to be used or not used. Allow them to degrade gracefully. Remove them if they serve no greater purpose, but monitor and make sure that you're not locking somebody out in the process. And as new technologies come online, do the same thing. So if you want to do accessibility testing and you want to get into feeling what it's like, this is a heuristic that Albert had put together, and we've tried this out, and I think it's quite good. It's very important. If you want to test for accessibility, be humble. Not just literally, but it is an acronym in the truest sense of the word, because humble actually means something here. Each letter represents something. Let's start with humanize. Put yourself in the shoes of the person that you are trying to represent. This is where persona-based testing is huge. Don't just say, I'm testing for someone who's blind. I'm testing for someone who's deaf. I'm testing for somebody who has limited range of movement. Really get to know who they are. If you really want to commit yourself, make it something that you can't escape easily. One of the processes that I oftentimes use, especially when I'm testing for limited mobility, is duct tape is my friend. I literally will start a testing session, say for an hour, and I will wrap duct tape around multiple fingers. Or I will bend my hand into a position, like to resemble someone with say, cerebral palsy. And then I will literally work with my system in this capacity. It's heart-wrenching. It's really very, very humbling, to borrow from the phrase again, to put yourself in that situation. But even doing that, at the end of my session, I can always take a pair of scissors and cut myself out of the tape. People I'm doing this for, they can't. So even then, I have a limited amount of really understanding the situation they're dealing with, but it helps considerably. You don't have to go to that extreme. If you can do it as a mental exercise, that's great. But it really does help tremendously to put yourself in the shoes of the people that you are working with. Unlearn. All the things that you think you know about how you navigate a page or work with a page go out the window when you turn on a screen reader or you plug in an app like Dragon, naturally speaking. If you really want to have an exercise in frustration, learn how to use Dragon for the first time, where you're controlling everything on your computer just with your voice. I actually set up a lab in an office well away from the rest of my team because my frustration levels grew so high. I don't usually swear, but I start yelling and I get very vocal. And so like, open menu, open menu, open menu, open menu! You don't want to subject your teammates to this. So it's good. If you have an isolated room that you can set up so that you can figure out what you're going to do while you're working on these, it's positive. Or just give everybody fair warning and say, you might want to have an extended lunch. I'm doing accessibility testing today. Everybody knows what that means. Like, all right, see ya. We're out of here. Because they don't want to hear it. I can't blame them. Model. As I said, taping up your fingers, or pulling a hat down over your head, or turning off all the lights, or simulating a situation to where you have headphones on that are just blasting music so you can't hear what's actually happening. That takes you out of your element. And then you can actually see how your application works for the area that you're concerned with. There's also some programs, if you really want to see what it feels like to have dyslexia, you can actually run your page through a filter that will scramble up the letters. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It was one of the most that in and of itself was what, for me, because I'm fairly good at reading and I can scan things really quick, and I've never dealt with it. But oh my gosh, it was so painful. Build. Learn as much as you can about the technologies out there. Make your systems. Get any tool that you can that can help you with this. Learn what the barriers are and how you function with your systems. It goes back to unlearning. Unlearn, but also learn the new ways that you would work with it. And then finally, experiment. And really, again, put yourself in the shoes of the people that you're working with and give yourself as much of an opportunity to experience it for as long as you're willing to deal with it. And to be fair, accessibility projects can be long-winded. They can take quite a lot of time. And if you're going to commit to being on an accessibility project, you're going to be committing to a fair amount of frustration for yourself. And that's a good thing, because the more frustrated you get, the more of an advocate you become. And it really does start to drive those conversations so that the next time your project is coming up for a review or a discussion, you're going to be in that first meeting talking about those stories and say, what are you doing about accessibility? Well, we're going to get to that later. No, you're not. You're not going to get to it later, because you're going to put me through hell if you make it later. We're going to talk about this now. And we're going to address it now so that we don't have to go through this again. Yes, you will have conversations like this. And it's quite eye-opening. All right. So this is just an example from our own product. And you can't see it. If you were just to navigate with it with a mouse like normal, you would not notice that there was a problem. You would just click, select an item, and move on. For those that used the voiceover example I just gave, you'll notice that there was also a closed caption underneath, and it showed you exactly what it said, which was captured here. So in this case, there's a bug on this particular screen. You can't see it. But if you were to have the screen reader on, you would have heard it. Can anybody tell me what it is? Here. Does that have any meaning to anybody? Nope. Right. It just says page.breadcrumbs. Now, if you're listening, what does that mean? It doesn't tell you anything. What it was meant to say was, recently viewed. Give me a list of the places I've been. Tell me tab down to the page. Don't tell me breadcrumbs. That doesn't do me any good. Now, yes, the system keeps a hash, and breadcrumbs means something. It means, oh yeah, it's that top Signal Files Central link. That's the last place I was. Tell me that. So part of this, and one of the things that I want to also encourage, is that there are two competing ways of looking at accessibility. One is that you focus on accessibility later. You put it in after you've designed your product. And sadly, this happens. A lot of people do this. And it becomes a very frustrating process. I'm suggesting we can do it better. And I'm suggesting that we do it at the beginning of the process. Let's be agile about this. As we're developing our product, let's talk about this up front. And I'm going to suggest you use a different term, because accessibility, for better or worse, has baggage associated with it. As I said, most of the time people think about it from the nature of a lot of money's on the line if we don't do this, or we're going to get sued. So I like using a term called inclusive design. And inclusive design has a lot of proponents. In fact, the University of Cambridge in the UK has done a lot of work on inclusive design, and I've included it in the notes here. Accessibility is being able to make products available and incorporate assistive technology for those who most desperately need it. Inclusive design is the idea of developing a product to be as inclusive as possible, knowing it's not going to be able to be effective for every single person. But if we make the effort to do it all up front that we can, to include as many people as possible, and do so with the minimum amount of needs of change to the product, that's going to be incredibly helpful. And it's going to save us a lot of work. One of the things that I found really cool when I was preparing this topic, and I gave it as a discussion at a local meetup, and I was trying to make this point, and one of the members of the audience stood up and said, I actually can show you the best and most helpful thing that has happened to accessibility in the past 25 years. They took out their phone. All the effort that has gone into responsive design, that has gone into being able to display information on a phone and contracting it and sizing it and shaping it and all that, that goes a long way into answering a lot of what happens for making a product accessible. You've already done most of the groundwork. By resizing it and by reshaping it, you don't have to dig in. Has anybody ever gone to like, oh yeah, hey, I see a link, and you click on something and it's a normal web page, and you get this little itty bitty tiny screen, and it's unusable. But all the steps that make a product responsive, most of that also helps make a product accessible, which is fantastic. So why do we care about inclusive design? Well, fact is, if we're lucky enough to live long enough, every single one of us is going to have a disability that we get to deal with. I am dealing with mine now. I have passed that magic age marker, for this purpose. Anybody who's lucky enough to live beyond 45, you're gonna get to wear these. But these are a little bit more frustrating. Now, many people, a lot of people in the audience probably have glasses and have had them for years. Like, dude, what's the big deal? We've dealt with this for years. The benefit, I won't say the benefit, that's a lousy word. But you have them, and they're scaled for your eyes, and you can go about most of what you do. I don't need these unless you are within 3 feet of me. Outside of 3 feet, you all look great. You're in sharp focus, everything's perfect. But if you get within 3 feet of me, text, it goes very fuzzy. And if it's smaller than 14 point, I can't read it. I have to put these on. But if I'm looking at you now, I can't see you. It gives me a headache. So I have to do this all the time. So inclusive design is wonderful to me because I appreciate apps that actually take into consideration that not everybody wants to be putting on their readers and taking them off every time they have to pull out their phone to look at something. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about an app that does a pretty good job with this. Now, for those of you who follow me on Twitter and who read my blog, the past few months I have been aggressively focused on one target, and that has been to get myself in shape and to lose weight, and to a lot of people, that's the only thing I seem to be discussing. So yes, I'm going to be using an app that fits that sphere. The app I'm talking about is called Lose It, and it's a calorie counter, it's an activity monitor, and it's an application that gives you information about what you're doing through the day, and so that you can react to it. And I'm going to use this as an example of inclusive design and things that I think that it does very well. Again, put yourself in the situation of a over 45-year-old man who needs to pop on or take off glasses if he wants to see anything up close. So this is the main screen that you see if you actually get in. This is your calorie screen. How much have I done today? What I like about this is that even without my glasses, if this were in front of me, I don't have to put a lot of effort into seeing what this means. I may not be able to read the exact words, I may not be able to see the small fine print, but I know what I'm looking at. That's my calorie dial. And note, I'm really close to my limit. That's what's important. You know? All right, I'm not going to be eating much more today. Water it is, because I'm very close to the edge. And if I start seeing red, I know I've gone over it. Down below, I see my trend. How am I doing for the week? Oh, okay, I've got a little bit of leeway. I can work with that. Fantastic. This is my macronutrient breakdown. Say that 10 times fast. Again, can I tell exactly what those are? Nope. But I know what the colors represent, and I know that they are contrasted enough that I can see which one's which. And without looking too much, okay, my fats and my proteins are relatively in line. I'm a little high on the carb side, so one of those needs to be fluctuated. I can make a decision from it. I don't have to sit down and pull out my glasses and go, all right, what am I looking at? Just right there, I can see that, and I can see what I'm going to do with it. This is a step counter. The green on the top means I've gone beyond my goal. Awesome. And here, these are just a variety of little challenges that they have and that they show. So what this gives is it just gives a simple example of how far along am I? How do I work with these people? Where do I get to go? What do I need to do? Again, the whole key to this is that if I'm on a bike or if I'm walking and I'm doing something and I'm active, I don't want to have to dig for my glasses just to be able to see what's on my screen. I appreciate the fact that they have taken the time to design their main screens in such a way that I don't have to do that. That's where inclusive design can be incredibly helpful. And the whole point is, by designing a product in a way that more people can use it without having to fumble, without having to make accommodations for it, it makes it easier for everybody to use. So it's good business sense to start with inclusive design and work on it for all the things that you do. So again, let me recap. Make your products highly structured, easy to learn, remember, navigate, and operate. Make it consistent, provide more than one way to function with it, and please test your implementation. And really put yourself in the shoes of the people that are going to be using your products. And be prepared for how that will make you feel. There's a few standards that I can recommend here. There's the Way Aria standard that is a global initiative for accessibility. There's the WCAG that also does that. And for those who like the idea behind inclusive design and want to learn more about it, the Inclusive Design Toolkit, which is offered by the University of Cambridge, is a great place to start. I definitely encourage taking a look at that. Here's a list of tools that you can use. I will make these slides available to everybody if you want to get access to them, so you don't have to frantically shoot to get these. And for further reading, if you want to know more about Humble, if you want to know more about some other heuristics, there's a paper that Albert and I wrote called Black Box Accessibility Testing, a Heuristic Approach. And the best book for accessibility testing and design that I've personally come across, again, and it helped us define the name of the talk today, A Web for Everyone, Designing Accessible User Experiences, Sarah Horton, Witten Quesenberry. It's worth it. It really will get you into the personas of the people you're working with. And thank you very much. Yes, please rate. And questions? Yes? Sure, no, sure. Here, I'll come down here.
Hey. Okay, so how I end up in this presentation. I studied game design and started to develop video games for children, which is kind of also like a disability. You know, they can't read, they have this kind of like a dyslexia. And I started to use all those programs and we're okay, I can't read, how do we make this all intuitive that even children can use it? but I could never really, we never had the same results as we did just, let's try as the children had. I mean, the children were like, in the end, the software was in the end easier to use for the children than it was in the end for the adults. So it was kind of like, my first issue is, like, how do we develop the software for the target group that we kind of like pick up all the users. And the second issue I have is like now that I work in a different company where we are like developing like e-commerce shops. How do I überzeugen? Convince the product, the stakeholders to invest further into barrier-free testing, barrier-free software.
That's a lot. But yes, you're absolutely right. So the first thing you focused on here is the whole unlearn, learn part of Humble, is that you will, no matter how much you invest in the persona of these children, you can't recreate who they are. And every one of them is going to be different, and every one of them is going to have a slightly different experience, different level of know-how, different engagement. And so the simplest answer that I would have is, if you're going to be doing testing primarily for young children, you need to have access to young children regularly that can give you feedback and work with them as part of your process. Try as hard as I can. I'm a parent of 3 kids myself, and try as hard as I think I can to put myself in my kids' head and be able to do what they're doing and think the way that they think and respond the way that they do. I get it right maybe 30% of the time. The other 70% of the time I'm off mark, just because I'm not them. I don't have the same level. For whatever way I want to look at this, I don't think about the world the same way they do. I've had too many experiences that shape my worldview beyond what they are. So unlearning all of that and thinking about it from their perspective is really difficult. And oftentimes it's impossible. So the best way to be able to get that interaction is, in this case, if you're working with children, especially from a particular age, if there's any chance that you can get a group of those children together to actively work with your product as you're developing it, that's honestly the best that you'll be able to do. If over time you start to realize that there are patterns and you can start to use those patterns to help you design without them, that's great. But you're never going to get that same quality of feedback as you will from the actual people. That's why also I can simulate what it is to be sightless, but honestly, I will never be able to approach that from the same perspective as somebody who is totally sightless. I have a friend who is sightless and uses a screen reader, and they crank up the speed on their, to 30 times faster than what I could deal with. I don't know how, but they've just developed the skill. They can listen extremely fast. And they tab on that keyboard, and they get through where they're going really quickly. I can't keep up. I've tried. I've tried to get to the point to where I can run it as fast as they can. No, it's never going to happen. At least so far it hasn't in the several years that I've been doing testing. I can't keep up. But they can, because that's their reality day in and day out. So the trick for me and the trick for the rest of us is we can only go so far. And we can only use the personas that we have to a certain point. Beyond that, if we feel like we're not sure if we're hitting it, we need to communicate with our target audience, and we need to make sure that we're hitting the mark and that they can appreciate that. Yes, here.
Have you tried using the external agencies to do some testing for you?
Sorry, go ahead.
Have you tried external agencies to do some of the testing?
We have. There are external groups that do specialize in doing accessibility, and you have to decide for yourself if the expense for doing that or the bulk of what you're going to do warrants going that far. It's certainly an option, and there are groups that do specialize in doing accessibility testing for those purposes. It does, as I said, You have to decide if the time lag for doing it and if the information you're going to be getting back and the expense for it justifies it. I personally think having somebody on the team who really does have a feel for it and has learned how to do it is beneficial because you have access to them all the time. But if in a pinch you really need to get a product out and you don't have the resources to do it, absolutely. Yeah, outsourcing it is not a bad idea.
Yeah, because they got access to people who will do the job for them.
Yes. I'm getting the sign saying my time is over, so I want to say thank you, everybody, for coming out. I hope that this has been worthwhile, and go out there and shape a web that everybody can use. Now it's up to you.